welcome to Genesis Global Radio, the origin of information. And now here's your host, Christine Larkin.
Hello and thank you for tuning in to Genesis Global Radio, the origin of information. I'm your host, Christine Larkin. On today's segment, we'll be speaking with Kimberly Berg, male feminist artist, creator of the website IsisRising.net. He is the founder of what he calls modern Paleolithic art. He is interested in drawing attention to the prehistorical, pre-patriarchal period in human evolution. It was a time when women played a very important role in creating a civilization built on female values. They were social values based on respect for women, on a peaceful community free of war and bloodshed, on compassion for others, on a lifestyle lived in harmony with nature and in spirituality that permeated every facet of their daily life. I'd like to welcome Kimberly Berg. Kimberly, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Let's talk a little bit about this. How did you become interested in feminist issues such as the treatment of women by men in our patriarchal culture?
Okay, well, it's quite a long answer. I first became aware of women originally their mistreatment as equals in our society. I always felt that they were not being treated equally. And the women's suffrage movement made that even more clear in the 20s. But it wasn't until the 60s when I was living in New York City in the East Village when the women's liberation movement first began.
What a time and a place to be, huh?
Yes.
Burgeoning with all kinds of activity. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I'm a history major, so I realized from the very beginning that this was not just a fad or a trend. I felt that this was something that was historical. But I did not feel that I needed to enter into the fray. I observed it more from the sidelines. Mm-hmm. I felt at the time that this was something that women would have to work out for themselves.
You could
and
sense,
it wasn't until much later, in '97, when I read a book by Lane Redman called When the Drummers Were Women, that I was introduced to the idea that women's history began before the patriarchal society was developed. Mm-hmm. Lane Redman traces the history of drumming that goes all the way back to the late Paleolithic, or 30,000 years ago. And she also covered the history of women as innovators of a culture that was based on female values of compassion and love. And this was completely new for me. I was completely startled by this information.
Yeah. I think it's a period that a lot of people don't know about, Kim.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know about it either. And I was, a history major. But when I was going to school, history started around the time of the Greeks. Mm-hmm. There wasn't anything important that happened before that, which is, a typical Western biased idea.
Right. A lot of things left out. So being a man, why does it matter to you that women be treated equally?
Well, I think there's sort of a association by guilt in this, because I'm a man, and here I was benefiting from the entitlements of patriarchy and knowing that I belonged to a tradition that didn't treat women fairly. And I realized, even though my behavior was not reprehensible, at least I didn't feel at the time it was, I
That's
still
a good thing.
was a part of the male gender. And so even if people didn't know me personally, they would be associating me with the same ideas that are associated with patriarchy.
Right. And coming out of the 50s into the 60s and that female or feminine revolution, you could certainly see the shift. Describe to us a little bit about how that felt living in the East Village. I know the East Village of New York.
Well, it was quite active. One of the memories that stands out is women were trying to break into places where they had been barred for generations. Mm. And there was a tavern in the West Village that was exclusively run for men. And the women decided, that they were going to try to break into this tavern and sort of shake things up a bit.
I bet I know it.
Yeah. And they succeeded, and they got in the paper, and they made the headlines, and it was quite the talk of the town for quite a while.
Are we talking about McSorley's?
Yeah, McSorley's. Yeah. I forgot the name, but I'm glad you remember.
I was actually just talking about it yesterday. It's on 7th Street. Yeah, it's from 1854, quite a historic place. And it really was a drinking hole for men only.
Yes, right.
So, Kim, tell us, how does your art, you're this amazing artist. I've been on your site, your paintings, they're absolutely beautiful. How does your art, in your words, address such issues as a woman's inferior self-identity within a patriarchal culture?
Well, actually, the interesting thing is I wasn't even aware of what I was doing at the time. Mm. It wasn't until later, when I look back on my output, that I realized how it all fit together with what was going on inside of me and what I was observing outside of me. Mm-hmm. But I have, I developed about 6 or 7 different galleries, and like the meditation gallery, the meditation series provides a safe place to enter into silent communion with the deep forest. In other words, I was trying to show women in relationship to nature the way women responded to nature and lived in nature during the Neolithic period when they were surrounded by nature. Mm-hmm. And I feel, that women still have that connection to nature, but we're so involved in our urban society that most women are completely unaware of that part of themselves.
Yeah.
And the art is a way of bringing out that awareness.
Mm-hmm. Well, the city environment can make one very harsh. So tell us how you came up with the name Isis Rising.
Well, actually, I'm a poet as well as an artist. Mm. I have a very close association with words and the sound of words. Mm-hmm. And I liked the way Isis and rising go together. Yeah. It could have been any other goddess, but because Isis and rising go together so well, I decided that's how I would name it. But also, Isis is a very important goddess, especially in Egypt, and she was highly revered during the Roman times as well. And even today, there are societies just devoted to Isis.
Mm. So, how do you fit into our current society? I think it still is a little patriarchal. So what does it feel like now, culturally?
Well, patriarchy is not just a sideline. It influences everything we do. Mm-hmm. All our institutions are founded on patriarchal ideas, including religious institutions.
Yeah. Which is, and dictates how we currently live.
Right. And that's why it's so important that we become aware of this and try to change things. One person who is actually making some important contributions, I feel, is Riane Eisler. She wrote this book called The Chalice and the Blade. Mm-hmm. It came out in 1989 and was very popular at that time. But now when I mention the book, most people haven't read it or know nothing about it.
I haven't read it.
No? Well, see.
Is it worth a read?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, she introduces the idea that a society doesn't have to be necessarily patriarchal or matriarchal. Most people believe, it's not patriarchal, then it's got to be matriarchal.
Mm-hmm.
If men are not in charge, then it means that women have to be in charge. And Riane Eisler postulates a alternative, which she calls a partnership society, where both men and women are working together towards a goal.
I like that idea. Do you think we're witnessing that?
Well, like the fact that she's talking about it and trying to institute it, in various different ways, means it's an idea that's already becoming a part of our society.
Yeah. Well, we see it in government. We see it in religion on more of a spiritual level of women. Do you strictly paint women?
Yeah. All my work is figurative, and usually it features the woman, oftentimes the nude woman. And I actually, now as people are beginning to hear me, I'm spending a lot of time developing these ideas that we're talking about and creating less art. But I do have quite a body of work.
Yes, you do. And I'd like to mention that your site, go on at www.isisrising.net. It's ISISRISING.net. The work is just absolutely beautiful, figurative, lots of nudes, lots of beautiful femininity and positivity, ethereal, spiritual, natural. It's really lovely. And you can also email Kimberly at kdegas@artlover.com. Tell us, are you inspired by Degas? Degas also painted a lot of women. Tell us about that inspiration.
Yeah, well, that's why I chose that name for my email, because I was hoping that maybe some of it would rub off,
Yeah, I actually have a Degas painting, not an original. My gosh, I would be, very wealthy. I love it. Beautiful word. Well, thank you for joining us and sharing your art with us today.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I'm your host, Christine Larkin.
For upcoming segments, log on to www.genesisglobalmedia.com and keep your finger on the pulse of the hottest brands on the planet.